Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to the Eon podcast. We've been joined here today by Raja AbdulHaq. He is a Palestinian activist and the co-founder of Quds Network, the news network. Raja has been sort of on the front lines on the American scene, where we've seen an absolute breakdown of the civil liberties and freedoms that have been guaranteed in the American Constitution to the American citizenry, as well as to people visiting the United States as students or business people or what have you. Raja, how are you doing? And what's the situation like in America right now?
Alhamdulillah, doing okay. Given what we're observing around America and around the world, I think it's obvious right now at this point that Palestinians and their allies are not seen as equal human beings that deserve to be listened to, cared for, or even for their perspective to be shared. I think our narrative and our cause and our people and anybody who stands with us is being automatically relegated to the status of subhumans that can be not just eliminated like in Gaza, but also can be eliminated in the US by being, as we've seen, like people's visas and immigration status being revoked and expelled and kicked out of the US. People in the US have been, especially our youth, have been facing massive violent crackdown by police departments around the country. There's been attempts to crack down on our protests and community at large to intimidate people and force them to forego and dismiss and not care about the Palestinian cause, especially the situation in Gaza. But at the same time, as Muslims, seeing what's happening in Gaza humbles us because no matter what we go through, it's nothing in comparison to what our people in Gaza are going through. So it's the least we can do, and the least amount of sacrifice, if you call that a sacrifice in comparison to the people of Gaza.
Allah, you couldn't have said it better. I think the black bagging, as we would describe it, that people have been facing in the United States, it's I could say that it's unprecedented, but there is a history of uh, you know suppressing popular dissent, like we saw in the Occupy Wall Street movement at that time, during the anti-war movement, during the Iraq War, as well as the Vietnam War. And America has a cyclical history of suppressing, popular dissent amongst the people, and it has a very short, sort of attention span or memory, never learning from the mistakes that they've made in the past. Do you think that the American people are doomed to remain silent and repeat the mistakes that they made during the war on terror and during the war in Vietnam and all these previous incidences? Do you think that the internet is going to make a difference? Do you think young people are more, um, you know, involved with the genocide that is happening, and they won't stand for it right now? What's the pulse on the ground?
No, I think you raise a really good point. And it's one of the things that I constantly talk about, and we have many of these debates within our community. A lot of our people and a lot of our youth, unfortunately, sometimes run into conspiracy theories and to kind of understand the world. And I mean, understandably so. I mean, um, when you're facing so much tyranny, so much oppression, so much dismissal of basic human rights in Gaza, you're seeing the genocide happening and seeing people justifying it, legitimizing it, and giving ammunition to not just to Israel physically, but also ammunition to their propaganda. A lot of people feel like what's going on, and the best way for them to understand it is to feel that the U.S. government is hijacked by Zionists
Yes.
or some of that stuff. But I think you raise a great point, which is that America has a legacy, has a heritage of oppression, of tyranny, even genocide. I mean, if you go back all the way to 1492, when so-called Columbus so-called discovered America, basically what he did was, as we all know, he came to this land, what is known as Turtle Land, and he committed genocide against millions of people as in the natives of this land. Similar attempts were done by white European colonizers in Canada and in Australia and in New Zealand, and some attempts even in Africa, as we know, in South Africa, in Namibia, in different places. So this is a legacy of Western white colonialism and imperialism that has always and was always funded and created to oppress the brown man and to so-called quote unquote civilize them, to bring them to so-called civilization. That is the history. But in the past 100 years, as you mentioned, there's a history of crackdown on any dissent, especially students' mobilization and activism against wars overseas. And you mentioned a few examples as well. But if you go back all the way after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, the so-called the First Red Scare,
Yes.
all the way to like McCarthyism, the Cold War, all the way to throw Japanese and Americans in concentration camps, all the way to fighting against those who are against the Vietnam War. And if people remember, like in or read about it in 1970 in Kent State University, the U.S. Police and National Guard, like they killed 4 students. It's not like what we're seeing today as a crackdown on Palestinian students and their allies. It's not something new. Honestly speaking, I would argue it's not even the most violent period of American empire in its crackdown and violence and oppression against students and against people who dissented politically. But also, let's not forget slavery. Let's not forget the oppression and white supremacy against Black people. The fact that Black people spent hundreds of years as slaves and then continued to fight for their freedom, for the civil liberties, and for the basic human rights. So this is a continuation of that legacy, and people have to understand that no matter who's in power, America as an empire or as a modern nation state, it was established to maintain white supremacy through white access to power and to wealth, and anybody who challenges that then will be facing the violent state through crackdown, whether it's against students or not. It just happens that students usually, as we all know, are the most vocal and the vanguards of our society in general to push for the narrative. Now, is it going to be different this time, as you mentioned, or as you asked before? I think definitely you can see that the students nowadays are much braver than before. They're not coming from baggages of the effects of September 11 and the war on terror campaigns. So they have a different mindset. And I think the sacrifices and the bravery of the people of Gaza have been, teaching and influencing people around the world to stand up for justice and to fight for what is right. So hopefully this time, students are not intimidated, our communities are not intimidated. But the reality is, people in their nature, they get intimidated, especially, and you asked a very good question, is that how can Americans and American public continue to support this and be silent about this? The reality is, and this is something all of us have to think about, Gaza is not disconnected from the international order. It's not disconnected from the nature of the so-called American dream. The concept of American dream is to turn people into consumerists, machines who only care about working in a rat race, making money, enjoying their lusts, buying the latest things, and only care about paying rent and enjoying their life. When you have a reality where people's aspirations in life is to get basic human needs, even though that basic human needs in American context is also like the latest phones and the latest cars and the latest technologies. When they're so busy into spending their life in that battle, in that rat race, it's very hard for them to take a step back out of that and let go of their American exceptionalism and start worrying about children being bombed and being massacred overseas. It's not that easy, because as we all know, the issues of homelessness in America is something foreign to the people in the global South. Like, I was born and raised in Palestine. I was there for 18 years. I've never in my life seen anybody who's homeless. Because in our culture, we have the social dynamics, the social fabrics. People take care of each other. But in the US, if you don't work for a couple of months, you are at high risk of being homeless. So all of these challenges that are created and designed by capitalism, designed by the state and this empire, is a way to intimidate people and keep them in check. So with all of these risks and obstacles that exist, it's not that easy to push the American public to know what is right and to actually stand up for it.
No, you've put it very eloquently, brother. That the entire American, state machinery is built in a way that it keeps people in check, making sure that they don't have political opinions that are too, dangerous for the ruling elite. What is and it's nothing new that is what is happening with the students protesting against the genocide in Gaza. But what is unique about this is that it is across the aisle sort of a failure, where you see that the Democrats pandering to the Zionist lobby as well as the Republicans. And I want you to break down for the audience both the situations on the left and the right. So the liberals that would support classically the Democrats on the left, and on the right, the Republicans and the new MAGA movement or the alt-right. They have all faced a similar disappointment with the new Trump administration or with the previous Biden administration. So if you could break them down one by one, like we see with the Democrats that they have historically provided some lip service to the Palestinian cause, or some politically correct language to not offend the sensibilities of Muslim voters or Arab voters or voters from the global South that have shifted into America through migration. However, they have completely failed to deliver during the Biden administration. What do you think were the mitigating circumstances there? Why was it such a resounding failure when they could have hit this out of the park? They would have had the votes of the entire, quote unquote, brown and black population.
Yeah, I mean, the best way to look at this is invoking what Malcolm X mentioned in last century when he compared the liberals and the right, or Democrats and the Republicans, and he compared them with the fox and the wolf. He's saying that the wolf is aggressive, but the fox is also aggressive, but the fox is a little bit more deceiving, right? Can give you nice words until they get what they want, but they both are aggressive, they both are violent, and they both are against you. And also, I want to draw an image or of an idea of the difference between the right wingers and the Democrats. I want you to think about when Obama famously bombed a wedding in Yemen.
Yes.
When he was in power, American Empire and even Obama and the administration, like, they showed remorse, right? Or at least they did not go all out like Trump when he bombed the tribal meeting that happened last week in Yemen, right? So both have bombed civilian targets. Both have bombed our people overseas. One showed remorse and did not take credit for it, and another one took it all out on Twitter and celebrated it. So the difference is literally in marketing. They both have similar strategies when it comes to our people overseas. And it's very important to acknowledge that white supremacy and the Western colonial framework has always been about, the issue of barbarism and civilization. If you go back all the way to 19th century, when the French and the English and the Portuguese and the rest of colonial Europe, when they occupied and colonized our mother nations in overseas, for example, in India or in Africa or in the Middle East, they have always used very similar narrative and rhetoric, which is we have the white man burden to so quote unquote civilize barbaric people overseas, and this was used as a way to justify and legitimize. I mean, French until now, they claim that when they colonized Egypt and the rest of North Africa, they brought in enlightenment and knowledge and intellect, and they brought civilization to our people. So to them, they don't see us as a human being who deserves dignity, deserves political aspiration, deserve to have economic aspirations. To them, they see us as merely biological beings who just deserves and maybe don't deserve to live based on our alignment politically with the colonial West. Same thing can be said about the Democrats and liberals in the US. They are all an extension of the heritage of white supremacy, the European ethos, the 19th century ethos of utilitarianism, colonization, supremacy, and American empire is an extension of that. And throughout history, if anybody who studies American history, and which I think I provided a little bit of a quick summary of it, they have always been oppressive to minorities in the US. Italians faced oppression, Mexicans, Irish, Jews, Japanese, Chinese, I don't think there has been any one immigrant community that did not face oppression until they were forced to assimilate into the American dream and assimilate into the American empire of how to look at the world. Now, of course, and we know the story and the history of anti-blackness in the U.S. So, in general, as well, this is on one hand on when it comes to ideological framework, but on the other hand, as a so-called democracy, if you want to study democracy in the U.S. And in general, any democracy political scientists or scholars will always argue that the main pillar for democracy is to have the people, the general people, to be able to have influence on policies. But number two is to have the freedom of information. And as we all know, American mainstream media in general and journalism is bought by oligarchs who literally control that media and control the narrative and control what they say. And as Noam Chomsky calls it, the manufacturing of consent. So if you have information that is being controlled by elites that are in bed with the government and with the interests of the government, then you don't have a freedom of information. That's one thing. The second thing is the concept of choice and the concept of participating in democracy, not just through voting, but to actually have the ability to make a political choice based on your own convictions and based on your own interests. In the US, there's only two choices that you always have to make. So there is a concept of what we know as the illusion of choice, meaning that 4 years you vote Democrats. 4 years after, if you're upset with the Democrats, you go with the Republicans, and then you're upset again, they go back to the Democrats. So it feels like it's a cycle that is never ending, and it feels that Americans in general truly have no choice. It's literally choose between the evil and the lesser of the two evil according to where you stand in the political views. And this is why a lot of political scholars, like, for example, even someone like Noam Chomsky, talked about that there's no huge difference between the Democrats and the Republicans, with the exception of some minor details. Politically, I mean, economically, they're the same. They both follow capitalism. They might disagree on certain things when it comes to like social work and whatnot. But at the end of the day, economically, they're both are for the free market, so-called free market. Both are about like the international monetary fund systems. But most importantly, locally speaking, the oppression, as we have seen today during Obama's time, when he was massively pushing people outside of the U.S. to what we know as Trump now is taking pride in what is the word? Kicking people outside of the U.S.
Deportation.
Deportation. But Obama before Trump was a lot of people call him chief. What is it? Deportation in chief. Like he deported more people than any president in the history of the U.S. It's just that they don't talk about it publicly like Trump. They're not arrogant about it the same way as Trump. They do it in a way that is so quote unquote empathetic, and like they feel they care for human rights.
Fair enough. But don't you think that the MAGA right, the new sort of they wanted to shake up the system. They wanted an outsider, quote unquote. Can you see the disappointment in the MAGA right base because they expected an anti-war stance? They did not expect this immediate intervention in Yemen and in Gaza and these sort of obnoxious statements about Trump's Gaza plan and what have you. Do you think that there is a disappointment amongst the American right, or is this what they were voting for?
I don't necessarily see it as a disappointment. I know there's a lot of different branches and different sects on the right. There's definitely people like a lot of people who are like showing they're anti-Israel, and they feel like Israel is bringing in more hostility to the U.S. that is needed. But the biggest problem here is that their point of reference is not care for the Palestinians, is not care for the people from the global South. It's more of that supporting Israel is causing harm to the U.S., and that's why we need to stop.
There is some on the right now, like Candace Owens and these kinds of characters, Tucker Carlson, even Joe Rogan, and these kinds of like new media figures have stated that they feel very sympathetic to the Palestinian people and they think if it is a genocide. I think the genocide terminology and the language is now pretty much universal, except in a few I think unique cases on the right and maybe in the liberal spheres. Mostly people accept the term of genocide and or massacre or slaughter or whatever term that you might like to use. Uh, do you think that they were tricked? Do you think that the Trump administration has been somehow worse off than the Biden administration when it comes to the genocide?
I don't necessarily see it as being tricked. I see it as if many of these folks, especially on the right wing, truly thrive in conspiracy theories. And they truly believe in the concept of American exceptionalism. They truly believe that America is a benevolent force, that is a force for good, and its relationship with Israel is ruining that reputation. And that is my biggest problem with them, because as we all know, American empire is not a force of benevolence. America is not a force for good. America, since the Second World War until now, it has been a disastrous empire that has killed millions of people around the world, and that's my biggest issue with a lot of people who want to do so-called America first. Now, when it comes to not being forced into war and being anti-war movement, correct. And I think many people on the right, they want America to stop interfering and just focus locally. But that's a short-sighted view of America. America cannot survive as an empire if it doesn't interfere overseas. America until today has over 700 military bases around the world. America until now controls the world economy, as we've seen now with these tariffs. It's destroying the stock market. Is literally putting the world at risk. Petroleum and gas is controlled by the dollar. The world's economy, like the so-called UN, the all of the international order is truly controlled by the US. The US cannot just focus locally. And if it does, it's risking losing its leverage on the world. And that's why these people are naive in their politics, because they truly believe that Israel is ruining America and we need to stop supporting Israel. Now, not to say that some of them don't feel for Palestinians, sure. But if you follow them closely and you check some of their arguments about like the resistance or about
Right.
the Palestinian cause, a lot of them have shady politics and they come from this Western lens
Very,
of
very
looking at the
racist
world.
sort of, yeah, oh,
Exactly.
look, the sand people are fighting back kind of. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's very racist, it's
Exactly.
very demeaning. I completely agree with you. And for the sake of political expediency, we tolerate these kinds of views, but in actuality, in principle, they're not very moral, as I would like to refer to them. But what would you say is the role of the Muslim community in Europe comparatively? And I want to switch gears for a second. The Muslim community has had a big role and influence in terms of numbers, input into the economy, participation in the political process. In America, in places like Michigan, you've had the Muslim community very insular, very scared, very trepidatious. You saw them for the first time, I think, in the Trump election, that they've been very active in the past few years, especially because of LGBTQ and these kinds of social issues. But overall, they've been politically very quiet. And this maybe is the second time around that they're being targeted for their identity. The first time around it was during the war on terror times, and they were very quiet at that time. And the leadership and the scholarship, the ulama, the community leaders, they sort of had to capitulate to the American state. Now, second time around, are you satisfied with their role and their participation in trying to resist this genocide here in the global South or in the homelands in the Muslim world generally? We've we've been surprised by the silence of the Muslim communities in America, because Europe, you have these very vibrant Muslim communities that have fought back. Um, but in America, they've been very, very silent, as opposed to historically, they've been very active. What do you think the situation is on ground?
No, I think you're spot on. And unfortunately, the response and the reaction of Muslims and Arabs and allies around the world has been, I don't want to say has not been ideal, has not been good at all. If the fact that Gaza's genocide has continued over 500 and some days, the fact that we have over 50, 60,000 people were massacred and murdered, the fact that Gaza is being destroyed rock by rock, stone by stone, is telling that the Muslims around the world are in an unprecedented state of helplessness and powerlessness, and even cowardness, as you mentioned before. It's pretty sad. However, a lot of youth in Europe, in America, and even in the global South have been stepping up and going out of their way to protest and to stand up for Gaza. Like in the US, it's been over a year and a half, and people are still going to the streets. We just organized a massive protest in DC on Saturday last weekend, and we had thousands of people attending and coming from different states. And for anybody who's been following the Palestinian cause and the mobilization and activism in the U.S., know as someone who planned protests in New York City for over 10 years, it was very hard to get people to commit to months of protests, let alone over a year and a half. In the wars of 2008, 2014, we would be or 12. We would be getting hundreds. Sometimes we get thousands in the first days of the war, but then it starts slowing down, and at the end, it would only be tens of people to attend protests. Now you have thousands and thousands of people attending every single protest year and a half after. So people are waking up to the reality. The biggest problem is that the Muslim institutions in America, and I think in Europe in general, as we have seen, have not been stepping up to the occasion. Muslim scholars have also not been stepping up to the occasion, in the sense of like mobilizing the community, standing up against evil, standing up for justice, pushing people to force the government to stop the genocide, has not been even remotely close to what is needed. I think scholars in the U.S. can play more of a bigger and pivotal role in forcing the empire and forcing American administration to stop the genocide. There has to be disruption. There has to be ways to make our life about Gaza all the time, and to make the Muslim community to push towards ending the genocide. We do have influence. The problem is, as you mentioned, a lot of people want to work they don't want to be on the periphery of the empire. They want to be part of the empire, because a lot of them naively believe that if you're not on, as they say, if you're not on the table, then you are in the menu. But unfortunately, whether they are on the table or not, we're always at the menu, and we are always looked at as people that are not serious. Even during, as you mentioned, the election between Harris and Trump, there was a lot of push within the Muslim community to continue to vote for Democrats no matter what, because
Yes.
Democrats are quote unquote
Blue no matter who, and this kind of sentiment. Yes.
yeah, all of that nonsense, because Muslims in the U.S., the majority of them, at least the ones that are leading that political work, have benefited a lot from so-called diversity and so-called like post-Obama smile in your face, stab you in the back kind of politics. And they're okay with it because they want to feel included. They want to feel that they are part of the system. They want to feel that they're as American as everybody else. I completely understand it, but unfortunately, it has negative impact on our people here and our people overseas. For Harris and for the Democrats to lose, even if Trump was the outcome of that, I think was essential for the Muslim community, because the Democrats had to pay the price. We cannot, because where we are today, and again, this is not to exonerate Trump. I mean, Trump is a monster, and we know that. But we cannot ignore that Democrats have enabled this genocide. Democrats were not just enabled and complicit; they're part and parcel of that genocide. They bought time to Israel. They gave it ammunition. They gave it weapons and the money and the political cover, the mainstream legitimization, the concept of dehumanizing Palestinians to invoke political and cultural violence against them, against Arabs and Muslims as well. They are part and parcel of the genocide. They've started it. Trump, Muslims saw him, or so they were so focused at punishing the Democrats that they didn't care if Trump won. So the reality is on the ground, and I've seen, many of us have been seeing also the action in Europe and seeing the lack of solid response from Muslim scholarship, and specifically in supporting what's happening in Gaza. We've seen that people, even in the past Ramadan and Eid, have been consumed and resumed their life as normal, as if there's no genocide happening in Gaza, without talking about it in detail. Some masajids didn't even talk about Gaza in Ramadan, did not even address it, because unfortunately they just want to go back to living their life, and
As
they
normal,
feel that
yeah. They want to have the status quo back. They felt like the relief after the war on terror was something that they needed for at least a few decades. before something like this happened. I think the word I would use, and I've used this in Pakistan as well because of some of the attitudes that we have in the religious community, is that people have been inconvenienced by the genocide. They've been inconvenienced by the genocide, and their problem with it is not the loss of life, and it's the inconvenience of having to take time out of their day and having to deal with this crisis. We'll stop on the individual responsibility and the collective responsibility of the community. I really want to know about what is going to be the future on the global scale. Do you think that Trump will revive the Abraham Accords? And what is the role of Saudi, the Gulf states, and the UAE in particular going to be? Do you think there is a new normal coming and that Abraham Accords will double down, or that the global community will double down on this? Or do you think there is a paradigm shift in the Palestinian cause?
I definitely it's hard to predict, to be honest, for obvious reasons. The Arab states and the Arab regimes and their leaders are stooges to the West. We know that. We know they're stooges to America and European powers. So at the end of the day, their political their political aspirations, their political mobility is controlled by Western agenda and hegemony in the region. However, some of these regimes are smart enough to know that their population are not going to be okay with lots of this politics. For example, as we've seen from the Egyptian regime and the Jordanian regime, who
Yes.
both of them are not just tyrants, but they're stooges to the West. They have been helping, honestly speaking, in my opinion, I think they are partners in this genocide because they are not only protecting Israeli borders, but they're stopping any dissent and any public outcry against the genocide in Gaza. They're stopping, the Egyptian regime is stopping bottles of water from going to Gaza. And the Jordanian regime is supporting the Israeli army with fresh produce to help them continue the genocide in Gaza. This is beyond the decades of political support to the settler colonial project. They're part and parcel of that region, and they're of the American hegemony in that region, and they are pillars in the so-called security of the state of Israel. So these regimes, at the end of the day, they're loyal to American empire and they're loyal to the Israeli Zionist settler colonial project. So I don't, and this is why it's hard to predict what they would do next, because depending on the pressure, depending what the American empire demands them to do, and it depends on how to stay in power. Because many of us and many people, when Sisi did the coup against Morsi and Ikhwan in Egypt in 2013, many of us made it clear that Sisi came to power under the condition of supporting Israel's siege on Gaza. And we've seen and we've witnessed Sisi not only destroying tunnels, but destroying the Egyptian Rafah side, the Egyptian Rafah city, 5 kilometers away from the borders of Gaza, to remove any popular living, any marketplace, any kind of what's the word? Any kind of popular or population centric inhabitants of that land. So that land is disrupted now. And the idea was that if we can't close or shut down all the tunnels, let's remove the people from the city. So even if there's tunnels, nobody's going to help people to bring in food and medicine for the people in Gaza. So they're part and parcel of the blockade of Gaza and the genocide in Gaza. The Abrahamic Accords, it's hard to speculate whether that is going to happen anytime soon, especially if the genocide in Gaza continues. In general, Arab leaders don't do good at enforcing similar accords with America and with Israel, unless America and Israel throw some bones to them to show them that they're doing something for Palestine. And I think even Saudi regime has made it clear that they will not be able to normalize with Israel unless quote unquote Palestinians get a state on their own. And that has been their public position recently. Even though we know this is just public PR work just to kind of justify their positions and their complacency in the genocide in Gaza. But I hardly believe that any of these regimes will be able to sign any accords with Israel and the US at this moment while the genocide is happening. That might be at the end of the term of Trump if things get better in Gaza, if they're allowed to have a ceasefire and they're allowed to.
Yeah. How do you see the recent visit with Netanyahu? Do you think there was a bit of a snubbing there? Do you think there was a bit of a signaling to Netanyahu by the Trump administration that they need to wrap this
Yeah,
up now?
I think some people argue that. I think some people argue that, especially when Trump kind of dismissed removing the tariffs on Israel and telling Netanyahu that Israel is getting a lot of money from the U.S. I think maybe that's an indirect way of saying that, we own you, and you need to kind of maybe finish the job in Gaza soon. We don't know yet because there's conversations about Iran, about the Iran nuclear deal. There was conversations about Syria and Turkey. I do feel that definitely Trump, I think, snubbed like Netanyahu on multiple occasions, especially when it comes to Syria, when it comes to Turkey.
Yeah.
Even him publicly saying that we want to like have a diplomatic solution to the Iranian nuclear deal. But again, the U.S. and sees Israel as a client state. It didn't and sure that Israel has its own kind of independence, or what is known as like the sub-imperialist state, meaning that it's not completely controlled by the U.S., but U.S.'s influence is significant in Israel, as we know. So we don't know what's going under the table. We don't know what Trump is thinking or his administration is thinking regarding the region. But what we know is that in the current situation, it's very hard to have an Abrahamic Accords given the genocide in Gaza. I don't think any sane Arab leader, not because they're good leaders, but because they know that signing such accords while the genocide is happening is going to draw massive protest against them and against their regime, and that might make them fear of losing power and losing public and political
And also the
legitimacy.
precedent it would set for Israel in the region that Israel is the big bad guy and then they can do whatever it wants. It's a security threat to them as well. In closing, I don't want to take up much more of your time, but so Pakistan has historically had a role in the Palestine struggle. When we were founded, our founder, before even passing a single bill that was domestic, we passed a bill in resolution to support Palestine. That was the first bill that we ever passed in Pakistan. We provided them, the Palestinian struggle at that time, we provided them with weapons from Europe and helicopters and the like. And we've had a direct military confrontation with Israel during the multiple wars in Air Force conflicts. In fact, Pakistani Air Force is the only Air Force that has taken down Israeli aircrafts in open combat, flying out of Syria. However, since the war on terror era, Pakistan has changed its attitude towards Israel because our foreign policy in the Middle East is primarily dictated by Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, specifically by the UAE and Saudi, because of our relationship with them. And since the 2000s, we have adopted a two-state solution attitude. Well, prior to that, we had only the one-state solution attitude. In fact, our passport still says that this is valid for all countries on earth except Israel, which is not recognized as a real country. So there is talks of normalizations. Recently, about a month ago, it's all very hush-hush because in Pakistan, you can't talk about it openly. The people would lynch you. But we've had the third secret diplomatic mission of journalists and academics who went to Israel. And they were all expat idiots from America or Europe or somewhere. None of them actually live here, except one or two of them. And I won't tell you their names because then people would lynch them. Our state is always trying to posture, and the Abraham Accords before the 7th of October, it was all pretty much set that Saudi Arabia was going to do it, and then Pakistan would sort of lethargically follow through, saying, they're the Khadimul Haramain Sharifain, and they helped develop our nuclear program. If they're doing it, this is better for the Palestinians, and blah, 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 blah. Right now, we're in a catch-22. I think Pakistan is following a wait-and-see policy, where it's like it's doing with Syria as well. By the way, we've been very quiet about Syria. We're following a wait-and-see policy. We're seeing what Turkey is going to do. We're going to see what Saudi is going to do. And we're going to see what the UAE is going to do. Our relationship with America has also become tenuous since the axis shift and now the tariffs and what have you, and the new order that is rising, which is potentially multipolar, considering that China is an industrial power on the horizon. All of this context aside, what do you think that the Pakistani state can do that would aid the Palestinian cause? And what do you think the Pakistani people can do? These are two separate entities, by the way, with like most of the Muslim world. because people are very skeptical about boycotts. They're very skeptical about social media activism. So you have to, and I'm putting you on the spot now. You have to give us tangible solutions because people are very dissatisfied with their ability to participate.
Yeah, I think you provide a very good kind of summary of the situation in Pakistan and the geopolitics in the region. I think from the concept of the state, I don't want to get you folks in trouble,
No,
but
no, no
I
worries.
read
Pakistan, unlike the Arab world, Pakistanis can open up their mouth not only in front of the dentist. We have yeah. It's not the
I know
Gulf.
Pakistani folks are amazing. We all like this from all of you.
I mean, I mean, I mean.
Yeah, in general, I don't have much hopes from the global South leaders. I think the majority of them are stooges to the West or too afraid to do anything in favor of our people. I think in general they just are so obsessed with pleasing the empires. They're so obsessed with pleasing America, and take care of their own regimes than the actual aspirations and hopes of the people and aspirations and hopes of the people around them. But it's in Pakistan's best interest to stand up with Palestine for obvious reasons. I mean, we know that Modi in India has been, having or signing strategic partnership with Israel. We know Hindutva and Zionism are, in ideological framework are very similar. And we know Modi is moving in the direction of copying
Yes,
what Israel is doing and learning from it. So
they
it's been
already have.
Pakistan
Even in Kashmir, they have Israeli military contractors come in and train the Indian
training.
forces. Yes, yes, yes.
Because Kashmir is literally very similar to Palestine. You have a literally not just an occupation, but almost a settler colonial project
Yes,
to
they have
push in more.
700,000 soldiers just for Kashmir.
Yeah, so
700,000 army just for Kashmir. Yes.
absolutely. So it's in Pakistan's best interest, geopolitically speaking, if we want to talk about this just as so-called objectively as possible, it's in Pakistan's best interest to stand up for Palestine and use that as a card to push against Indian influence in the region and Indians' occupation of Kashmir and for Pakistani geopolitical needs in the region. It's in the best interest of Pakistan to align itself with a new Syria leadership, with even Turkey, even though Turkey has been disappointing in the past year and a half. But at least that's the reality. I know
But
people
you
might
play
be
with the cards you have, Raja. You play with the cards you have, not with the whole deck. This is the way
yeah, yeah.
this is the way the Ummah is right now.
Exactly. So for me, I don't expect a lot from the regimes. I would expect more from our people. I think our people, and I just want to acknowledge that, I have the privilege of living in the US. So I don't share the same risks as people do in the global South. And I understand the concerns and the
Now you
fears.
do though. Now you do though.
Yeah,
Welcome to Pakistan.
yeah, yeah. It's still not as bad as in the global South, but I appreciate the sentiment. I think the people in general in our region and people in the global South, I truly believe that we need to divorce ourselves from the Western mindset of how to look at ourselves. We truly see ourselves through the lens of Western progress and Western modernity and Western modernization processes. Like we want to become sticklers, we want to copy the West by blindly. But I think in the past year and a half has been more evidence that the Western world doesn't see us as equal human beings. You cannot convince anybody that the whole world was concerned about Ukraine and started fighting Russia and boycotting Russia and isolating Russia everywhere, right? But when it comes to Palestine, people are actually pushing more to more genocide in Gaza. We've seen American politicians literally telling Israeli officials like erase Gaza off the map, like
Yes.
directly, like a clear genocidal language that if
Intent. Yes.
yes, like and the fact that they're giving them weapons is not just intent, but they're like partners in that genocide. If there's any justice in the world, these elected officials will come up to justice. But the problem is the Western controlled international order is a joke in the sense that it only helps the people who deserve to be helped or people who don't look like us. They're not from the global South. They're mostly white colored or people who are that serve the agenda of the global South, the global North,
So the
the
South
colonial.
Koreas, the Japans, the Taiwans, the Hong Kongs, the Singapores, the Israels of the world.
Yes.
They are their
Or
allies.
absolutely. Or if you like, for example, in South Sudan, right? Even though they're black and brown, but the West wanted to divide Sudan
Yes.
into different regions. So out of the sudden now they care about Africans and
All
they
of a
want to
sudden,
take
yeah, yeah.
exactly. So that's something we and the people from the global south have to come together. We have to understand that the only way for us, and I mean this, and I'm not exaggerating, I'm not trying to be dramatic. The only way for the people from the global south to survive politically and even physically is through for us to work together and to unite together in order for us to empower our region and to empower our societies and our communities and our nations. There is no hope for us to align ourselves with Western colonial powers who don't even see us as equal human beings. The only way you will get out of that is that you will be used and utilized by them for them to achieve their goals and to achieve their hegemony in the region. And that is the reality, and people have to accept that. The sooner we accept that, the sooner we are able to build our nations to be built on freedom and liberty and prosperity. But that prosperity is not going to come by us bending backwards to American empire and European colonial powers. It's built by us building power, building freedom, and being united internally and externally. We need to build our ummah together, and it starts by aligning the concept of Islamic worldview, specifically that is based in human dignity. As
Yes.
we know in Islam, the killing or the murder of one human being in the eyes of Allah is like the killing of everybody on earth. So we don't believe that the dignity is only for Muslims. We believe human dignity is something that should be respected by every single.
The social justice, unfortunately, the religious communities right now, the social justice and the human dignity aspects of our faith are put on the back burner, and the ibadat and the sort of the ritual worships and the ritual purifications are at the forefront. When it is our system of social justice and human dignity is what made us what we are today, and it brought us into the
Absolutely.
into the leading civilization of Earth. And I think that people now, for people again, you have to clarify this. People, how can they do this on an individual level? Now they see this as a more vague, abstract principle idea. They want practical steps. What do I do? A young person listening to this right now, boy or girl, they ask us a lot about this. I've boycotted. I'm active on social media. I vow not to go. Do business with the Americans or the Europeans or study there. I'm going to go to the global south. I'm going to travel the Muslim world. People have changed their tourist destinations, their holiday destinations. Whole attitudes have changed, but they feel like they can't really do anything tangible. So what would
Yeah.
be the yeah?
So I'm starting I'm starting from the abstract and ideological framework because I think this is a long-term battle. This is not something just for the next couple of months.
Yes.
I want us to think about, unfortunately, stopping the genocide is not going to be easy without political sacrifices. And I know a lot of people might not be willing to do that political sacrifice, but I'm starting to from the abstract or from the generic statement of putting a framework for us to understand who we are as human beings, who we are as Muslims, and what is our positioning and our situation in comparison to the to the colonial Western world. Understanding that reality and understanding that, unfortunately, the majority of mainstream Muslim preachers and influencers are copying the Protestant way of doing da'wah, the Protestant way of linking ibadat with material success in life. As a good Muslim is someone who's just making good money and that's it. As you mentioned, ignoring the social justice
A very sort of
activist.
Calvinist sort of ethic, like the if God loves you, then you're gonna be well off or whatever. Yeah.
Absolutely. Galvanism is something that has infiltrated all of our communities and all of our da'wah spaces, unfortunately,
Prosperity
especially
preaching. I think that's what they call it. Prosperity preaching or something. Yeah.
or what is known as the Protestant work ethics.
Yes.
So understanding that and divorcing yourself from that leads us to my second point, which is becoming conscientious Muslim, meaning that you need to live your life in a way that is divorced from materialism. Now, again, I'm not asking you to go and live in caves and not enjoy life, but at the same time, understand that enjoying life should be conditioned to making sure that justice and dignity is above everything else. You
To
should not be
social and human connection, not to consumption. Not to
yeah,
consumption. Yes.
exactly. Exactly. And boycotting and living your life in a decent way should be a way of life and not just a response to Gaza. Meaning, even if the Gaza war is ended, you should be focused at not being a consumerist person who lives their life just to enjoy desire and that's it. So that is something that has to change your life. The fact that if you look at the sacrifices of people of Gaza, did not come from nowhere. These people believe that they are here on earth for a more purposeful goal than just enjoying life and living for a desire. So living as a conscientious Muslim who believes that you need to boycott evil, you need to stand up for what is justice, you need to live your life, choose your career, choose your college degree based on what is beneficial to the ummah and not just what's beneficial for you. Of course, I'm not saying don't study things that are will make you financially stable. Of course, that's important, but keep in mind that to also focus what is beneficial to the ummah. Now, this is the reason why I'm saying this is I want people to take this opportunity, this wake up call to a lot of people that are getting in this new reality that the things might get worse in the future, as we see based on the terrorists and based on what Trump is doing and based on Europe moving more towards the right wing direct for confrontation with the Muslim world, is that this battle might take long. So we need to be ready for it. And the way to
Yes.
be ready for it is to understand our purpose in life. Now, to more tangible things, number one, boycotting is something very important. You have to boycott any company and any corporation that is funding and supporting the genocide in Gaza. This is the bare minimum. Like as a Muslim, like this is unquestionable, and this is a fard. This is an obligation on you to boycott the people who are murdering your Muslim brothers and sisters in Gaza and anywhere in the world. And this should be continuation, not just for now. Number two is you really have to protest against the American embassies and American embassies, specifically in Pakistan. American empire is a partner in this genocide, and they need to understand that the whole world is standing up against this genocide, against their influence and their partnership in this genocide. Until now, there has not been enough protest and dissent against American institutions and American embassies around the world that are funding and supporting this genocide. You know, the embassy in Pakistan is a big one, right? And the
One of the
influence of America,
biggest.
yeah, and the influence of America in Pakistan is huge, as we all know.
Yes.
They have to
The
feel
last time the
that.
protest started a year ago, at the start of the conflict, when we were organizing the protest there, the Jamaat Islami, which is the Ikhwan equivalent of the South Asia, their Amir, their president was arrested on the direct orders of Victoria Newland is her name. What's her name? Newman.
Was
The
the ambassador, right?
no, she's a congresswoman. She's retired now. I think something Newman, something Newland. I'm forgetting her name. She directly called Islamabad and said, stop this right now.
Yeah.
So again, they're gearing up right now. By the way, on Friday, on the Jummah,
Good.
they're gearing up that they want to do the big. Probably going to be there. Hopefully, I'll try to cover it, inshallah. But let's see if it ends up happening or not. They're probably already negotiating with the government, behind
But
closed doors.
that's the problem, and this something needs to happen. Like there needs to be like an ongoing protest against the American embassy in Pakistan or embassies in Pakistan to put pressure on them on daily basis, not just once a week or once a month. And the young generation needs to push against this concept of negotiation between historic leaders who always wants to negotiate with the government and with the regime. There was no negotiating out of this genocide unless American empire feels the pressure and the wrath of our people, our resentment and our opposition to this genocide in Gaza. They're not going to stop the genocide. Why would they stop the genocide if they feel people are silent about it? But if you stand up to your people and you go to the streets and you take on the streets and make it clear that we're not leaving the streets unless the genocide is ended, then the US will start calculating its business, right? The US doesn't want to lose their allies in Pakistan. They don't want to destabilize Pakistan. They don't want the Pakistani people to be upset with the American empire and their influence in the region. You already talked about this, and we talked about how important, and people in Pakistan know more than me, know how important Pakistan is to the US because of the relationship with India and because of that region. So if America feels that the continuation of this genocide, if the genocide might cost them their influence in Pakistan in the region, then they would reconsider and they would think twice before continuing of that genocide. People need to understand the amount of leverage they have. Unfortunately, our people feel that we're hopeless and there's nothing we can do and we are powerless. We're not. We're just not stepping up, and we're not doing politically enough sacrifices to stop the genocide in Gaza. Now, again, it's easy for me to say this as someone who lives in the West, and I know you mentioned before that dissent and crackdown in our communities now it's been like something that is dangerous, similar to what's happening overseas. But I really urge the people to stand up for Gaza and stand up for Palestine by, pushing against American influence in the region by telling them that we're not okay and we're not going to be silenced by leaving this. And if all Arabs and Muslims around the world and our allies in the global South, if they do this against American embassies and against American institutions to protest against them and make it clear that America needs to end this genocide will end. But unfortunately, as you and others know, the protest around the world has not protests themselves have not been that powerful or that consistent or that sustainable for America to feel that there's a pressure on them. They don't feel there's a pressure on them. The regimes are with them, and the people and the populations are out of fear. They're not doing much, and for them, why should we stop? Right? As we know, France colonized Algeria for over 100 years. Right? If there's no cost attributed to it, why would they leave? So-called Great Britain, colonized India for also over 100 years, right? Why would they move? They would not leave unless the cost of staying there becomes more significant than the profit and the benefits of it. If America realizes that the cost of supporting the genocide is now heavier than the benefits of it, they will stop it, because that's how they function. They don't care about human beings. They don't care about the damage that is happening in Gaza, the casualties, the children being shredded in the streets. They don't care about all of that. All they care about is their geopolitical influence and hegemony in the region. By threatening that, by rising up and uprising and descending and protesting, is when they think that it's time to end it. So we have this obligation and we have that power, and our people need to understand that we have the power. We just have to act upon it.
Brother Raja, thank you so much for your time. Jazakallah, you've been great. Hopefully the audience has questions. We will pester you again and bring you back on with the audience's questions. Thank you so much for your time. We'll leave the link to the Quds Network, and people can see your work and follow you online, inshallah, and they can communicate with you directly via Twitter and other platforms. Raja, thank you so much. Jazakallah for your time. Assalamu alaikum.